So, Rich, we had the Fantasy Football Expo over the weekend. Drove up there with David Kitchen, had a good time, talked to a lot of folks in the fantasy football space, did my drafts for the Kings Classic. It was just a great time overall, right? So Friday night, there's always a party that goes on at the Fantasy Football Expo in downtown Canton. It's this outdoor area, and there's like a bar, like a sort of inside-outside bar that's there. And we're watching the Browns game, right? Because the Browns were on TV. We're watching Shedeur Sanders. And I am there. I might have had a handful of White Claws in me. Yeah. And all of a sudden, Kitchen turns around and he goes, "Hey, JJ." He's like, "You'll never guess who's here." I was like, "Who's here?" And he goes, "It's Harold Fannon's mom." And I said, "What?" And so I walk over, and other people were there, and they're like, "Yeah, this guy JJ, he has this prospect model, and he'll be able to talk to you about Harold and stuff." And the first thing I did, again, I had some White Claws in me. First thing I did, embarrassingly, is I looked at Harold Fannon's mom, and I said, "Do you walk like a duck too?" That was my first reaction when seeing Harold Fannon's mom. I realized, though, that I got a good read on the situation because she looks at me and she goes, "Who do you think taught him how to walk like that?" Now, when he's up against defenders, they have no idea where he's going. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Bestball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, joined as always by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Doing great, buddy. Loved seeing the preseason action this weekend. We're getting ever so close to the season. Recorded our first episode of Gridiron Gamble last night. So the autumn wind, I can feel it coming, JJ.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we were watching some preseason football on Friday. And by the way, when I say that I had some White Claws, I'm a lightweight these days. Okay, this was not many White Claws that were flowing through me before talking to Harold Fannon's mom. I do want to shout out the family though, because other members of Harold Fannon's family were there. Awesome people. We had a great time chatting with them for like 15 minutes. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the little story that went along with that. But yeah, man.
I thought you were going to shout out White Claw. How do they do it, man? How do they get those things so delicious with such low sugar count, such low calorie count?
It's called magic, chemicals,
really,
Rich. It's called chemicals.
Well, yeah,
what it's really called. Yeah. But no, so we got to watch some of the preseason action, and a lot of stuff has been going on. And so I thought today it would be a good idea for you to bring some ADP stuff to the table, and we'll talk about the 5 biggest movers, risers, not fallers, but risers since training camp started. For best ball purposes, and we'll go one by one. Technically there's 6 because we're just kind of combining a backfield with this, but we'll see where I'm at with my exposure. We'll see where I've been drafting that player, and if I'm still drafting that player. So let's just do it. Let's just talk about these risers and players who have seen their ADP jump since training camp started. Rich, who's the first one that we should get to?
Nobody has jumped more than a fella who is now my neighbor, sort of. I'm close enough to Costa Mesa where the Los Angeles Chargers train, and Keenan Allen is back with the Bolts, and he jumped up from 195 to 131. That is 64 spots in ADP. JJ, I'm very interested to hear, based on your love last week from a young receiver in the Chargers corps, how you're treating Keenan Allen now. I know you were interested pre-signing, scooped up some of that value, but where are you at now that he has a team and he's rocketing up the chart?
Yeah, the interesting thing with Keandre Lambert-Smith is I actually don't think he's like a terrible pick still, because now he's just a 20th round pick instead of like a 18th, 19th or whatever. So like, even if you were drafting KLS, before the signing happened, I don't think it's that big of a deal that Keenan Allen signed. Of course, like the KLS ceiling is not necessarily, the same, and it's definitely not. But, KLS was someone who was always a big play threat, someone that you're hoping could give you like 2 or 3 spiked weeks and then maybe grow into something more. And that's capped, but I still think he can give you some spiked weeks this season, just given the kind of player he is and what he brings to the table. So keep that in mind. With Keenan Allen, so right now my Millie exposure to Keenan Allen is at 10%, so a little bit over what's expected. Obviously, when I give you guys my exposure numbers here, the average or the expected exposure would be 8.3%, just given the fact that we are 1 of 12 in these drafts. Then obviously there's going to be some players that the field is not drafting every single draft necessarily, or didn't, back in May and in June because the player hadn't broken out or wasn't getting hype out of camp. So keep that in mind. But right now, my Millie exposure to Keenan Allen is 10%. I looked, and my average pick for Keenan Allen was 193, or has been 193. And now obviously his current ADP is closer to like 130 to 135. So, that's not surprising because I was drafting him before he actually signed with the team, and he's ended up signing with the Chargers, which I think overall is a pretty okay spot. Like I've seen a lot of people kind of downplaying it and saying that it's not like a great place for him to go. It definitely makes Trey Harris someone that I'm not really interested in drafting. I still think his ADP is a little bit too high. He's had some struggles in camp with his hands and catching. He was in my opinion, if you go read the prospect guide, pretty volatile prospect, but one who had a pretty high ceiling. So I just, I kind of just came in the middle with him versus the rest of the market, and just said, hey, I'm just going to play the middle ground with Trey Harris because I can see where this can go south, but I also recognize that some of his advanced metrics were pretty good. But with Keenan Allen, I think a lot of people are just assuming that he's going to play the slot in LA, and then Ladd McConkey moved to the outside. Now, McConkey can play on the perimeter. I think people think that he's only like a 50-50 slot guy, but he can play on the outside. But I'll say this about Keenan Allen. Last year, he had a 26% target share per game rate, which is really strong for a guy that no one cares about, right? His yards per route run rate was actually much better on the perimeter last year than it was in the slot. And he's competing with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze last season, rookie Rome Odunze. And I know that a lot of his looks were just easier, kind of, lower ADOT looks, but I still think that you can draft Keenan Allen where he's going. I still think that he is not a bad value. I'll probably still get some exposure. Obviously, I've gotten a lot of my exposure. I'm 130 something milli drafts in. And so there's only so many, more drafts that I can do to get exposure to a certain player. So pretty much no matter what happens from here on out, I'm probably going to be above that 8.3% mark with Keenan Allen, just based on where I was drafting him before. But if you're going into a single entry, or if you're just drafting today for the first time, I still think Keenan Allen's an okay enough get at his current ADP.
He has the connection with Justin Herbert that he established previously as well. I'm really interested to see what this Chargers offense is going to be this year, because people think of this Harbaugh run first, cram the ball. They were 12th in pass rate over expectation last year per NFL ELO. So it wasn't like they were as ground and pound as people considered them to be. And I feel like last year their defense played above expectation and is going to take a bit of a step back this year. They've lost some personnel, obviously, up front with Joey Bosa traveling cross country to Buffalo. So I feel like they might even have to press the issue a little bit more throwing the football this year. So, I mean, this is a meteoric rise in ADP. I think we're getting to the point where an unstacked Keenan Allen isn't a very sexy option. But at his current price, end of the 11th round, I'm definitely more interested. If he starts to creep up a little bit more, if he starts to threaten those single digit rounds, I think that's when I'm going to have to yell uncle.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree there. I think that if you can get him in the 11th, 12th, it's fine. I'm not gonna be too upset about that. But yeah, you're right. If he does get, like, especially if he gets over like where the cluster of quarterbacks go, for instance, like I'd rather just get the quarterback and not have to worry about it.
All right, let's talk Texans backfield once again, because it's getting real interesting. We're getting real data from the preseason as well, but Woody Marks is up 50 spots since training camp has started, currently going at the beginning of the 16th round. He was previously going as low as 229, now up to 187. Whereas Nick Chubb is, interestingly enough, parallel in growth at 35 picks. So both pieces in this Houston backfield people are trying to get a piece of. And JJ, I'm interested in who you are more interested in if you're still on the Marks train as opposed to Chubb.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll share my exposure right now to these players. 3.8% for Woody Marks. Now that also you have to keep in mind, not many people were drafting Woody Marks consistently, earlier in the offseason. I certainly wasn't. My average pick for him has been 218. So obviously he's been, these guys are all risers. So you would hope that my average pick is better from a value standpoint than where we're drafting them now. Otherwise, I'm simply just getting him at an ADP right now, and I hadn't drafted him at all before that, but I did. So I'm at like 4% Woody Marks. I don't really want to get that much higher. I don't think I don't want to go nuts with Marks. I don't think that he's going to be a league winner. Just looking at his prospect profile. Now, the model didn't mind him because he did have that receiving production, but some of that subjectively was boosted by that Mike Leach, rest in peace, offense, where we've seen guys historically just get crazy receiving numbers as out of the backfield. Now, he did transfer and he still had pretty good receiving numbers. And I think that's the kind of role that Houston would envision him playing. I just don't know how much of an early down role he's going to have. With that being said, I would rather invest in Woody Marks for sure than Nick Chubb, because I am of the belief that Chubb is likely dust. That's a strong way to phrase it, because I don't think that he's just not going to do anything at all. I just mean from a fantasy perspective, he's already been a player that has been one that counts on explosive runs and big plays to be a really good fantasy asset. And last year, coming off that injury, that was not there at all. Last year, Nick Chubb gained 4.9%, or gained 10 or more yards on 4.9% of his carries. The year before that, whenever he got his smaller sample, 21.4%. He'd never been below 13.1% during his entire career. There were a lot of signs that he's slowed down. He's not the same running back. And for a player that relies on those big plays because he's not that much of a pass catcher, to me, that's really, really scary behind one of the worst offensive lines in football, right? So you combine all of that, and that's why my Chubb exposure is only at 2% right now. My average pick for Chubb has been 187, so I got him, before a lot of the stuff happened this offseason with him. And his current ADP obviously is a lot higher than that. I really have not been going after Nick Chubb in drafts, even knowing that I've been fading Joe Mixon for the most part. I just am not really that interested in this backfield, despite it being relatively ambiguous right now. I don't trust the personnel enough, and then I don't trust the bodies in front of them blocking either. So, I'm fine with the passing attack for Houston, but I'm not as fine with the running backs there.
It's almost like we hope the Texans take a real big step back, and Mixon is just a dump off demon in PPR, especially in the DraftKings format, where in betting purposes, a lot of this is pointing towards look for an underdog in the AFC South, because I think the Texans are being priced like a shoo-in to win the division, and I'm not sure that's the case.
The thing that's going to be really interesting. The thing that's going to be really interesting with the Texans is their defense is really good. They have a really good defensive unit, and usually when you have that built, obviously you'd want to rely on the run game in these positive game scripts or these neutral scripts and a good offensive line. They just don't have that. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that all goes down for Houston this year.
The summer of Jacory Croskey-Merritt continues, up 41.2 spots since training camp kicked off. JJ, where are you at on JCM? Are you still drafting him? What's your exposure like right now?
People are going to be shocked when they hear this exposure, because it's hard to have a ton of exposure on a player that wasn't drafted, in every draft, in the beginning of July, basically, from May until that point. I'm at about 13% JCM right now. My average pick for him has been 227th overall. So I was drafting him before a lot of the true hype started. His current ADP, obviously much higher than that. Now he goes often, I've seen him in the 16th round this week already. So he's obviously steaming up and has been drafted higher and higher as each week has progressed. Now, when you look at day 3 running backs, and I've talked about this before, basically on this show and every show and on the newsletter and such, but when you look at day 3 running backs who are reliable with usable weeks during their rookie season, they tend to come from just bad backfields, crappy backfields by ADP, ambiguous ones, players where they don't have an RB1 or even an RB2 ranked ahead of them by ADP. And that's exactly what we have right now with Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler on that depth chart. I talked about this with Evan Silva on the players to avoid episode because I am avoiding Brian Robinson. I did get Brian Robinson today, actually, in a draft because he fell to like 110th overall. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'll get, some exposure to Brian Robinson. But
they literally forced you. They forced you.
Yeah, I mean, like, of course I'm going to do that, right? But with that being said, like, I just don't think B-Rob is special enough to be a league-winning type player. And since the talent isn't necessarily there for him, that means that there is there's work for the taking. If another player can step up and be more productive and just be better. And with Jacory Croskey-Merritt, or Bill, let's just call it Bill because it's a lot easier to reference it. That's his nickname. With Bill, what's really intriguing is that Brian Robinson, more of a plotter type and obviously a bruiser between the tackles guy. Austin Eckler is older now and is mostly just a pass catcher. I think he's still going to play that role. Jacory Croskey-Merritt is very much the most explosive running back in that backfield, which is why I think he's getting the love that he's getting out of Washington out of Commanders camp, because they look at him and they're like, wow, this guy, but it's in relation to Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler, two guys who aren't that explosive anymore. Right. And so I think that he's going to carve out a role as this season goes on, which makes me even less bullish on Brian Robinson, which I didn't think was really possible. And then Eckler, though, I think is still okay because Eckler is oddly falling as well as this has been going on. But I think that Bill is a bigger deal for Brian Robinson than he is Eckler. Like, Croskey-Merritt was not the biggest pass catcher in the world at all throughout his collegiate career. And Austin Eckler actually was good as a pass catcher last year when he got targeted. He had a really good yards per route run rate. I still think he's going to play that role for Washington as long, there's been rumors and such that he would get traded or get cut or something like that. But as long as he's on the team, as long as these are the three running backs that we're dealing with, and I'm still expecting that to be the case. So, with Croskey-Merritt, would I be taking him in the 16th round right now? Probably not. I'm also, at 13% exposure. So it's easy for me to sit back and say that. I think that if you're in a single entry tournament that starts tomorrow, right? And you don't have to worry about people having that edge and getting Croskey-Merritt consistently in the 20th round, back in July. I think that taking him in the 17th is defensible. When you get to the 16th, you're starting to get into like Jerome Ford falls in the 16th at times. And we know that he's going to have a pretty legit role with this Quinshon Judkins stuff. So I'd have a harder time with that. And Rico Dowdle, who I like a lot, in Carolina, but I do think that he's going to carve out a role as a 7th round player. And a lot of people say, well, 7th round picks don't pan out very much at all. I get all of that. And I've done research on that. And I agree with that. But a lot of the players that you're drafting in round 18 plus, 17 plus in these DraftKings drafts are also not going to pan out at a very high rate. Maybe you could argue that you should just get a DJ Giddens type instead of a JCM because Giddens was a better prospect. I loved Giddens as a prospect. And he looks like the clear RB2 in Indianapolis. So if Jonathan Taylor were to go down, then DJ Giddens has more upside than Croskey-Merritt does. But I also think that you can make the argument that if Brian Robinson were to go down, then Croskey-Merritt might have comparable upside to DJ Giddens anyway. But there's more room for Croskey-Merritt to carve out a role naturally in his offense without the injury. So I'd still go JCM, but I think that I understand all that logic. And if you want to go that direction, that's fine. I wouldn't be so overly exposed though, just because you're not getting him in the 20th round anymore. And he is a 7th round pick.
Couple notes. I want to affirm your Austin Eckler. He's down 4 spots since training camp open, now going at the top of the 14th round. And I love the point that you brought up about some of these rising players and the difference between drafting them in contests that have been open since May and contests that might be opening now. It's a very salient point that I hope you guys caught while listening, because if we're playing the ADP game across these multi-month contests, it is more important to be more conscious of these risers. Whereas if a contest is just starting and there isn't such a diverse ADP landscape, multi-month ADP landscape, it is less impactful. So it's a very good point you brought up there, JJ.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's talk Jags running backs, because the tweets were flying from these individuals. We had you tweeted out the screenshot of we had Travis Etienne apparently come up lame in practice, did not want to speak to reporters, and Tank Bigsby gave us a stream of emojis. Shouts to Denny Carter, the enemy speaks kindly and carries a knife.
Yeah.
A little bit of action there from Bigsby. So yeah, would love to hear what your thoughts are on Tank, who has skyrocketed up 30 points, up 30 spots in training camp.
Yeah, so my average pick with Bigsby has been 155, and he goes about 30 spots ahead. So I've gotten some equity there and some value out of that. I have about 10%-ish exposure to Bigsby, so I'm a little bit above expectation. This is the kind of player that I despise in a managed redraft league. I would put him, Jordan Mason, Brian Robinson, Braylon Allen, these guys who are early down hammers who don't have good receiving upside or profiles. I'd put them in the same kind of buckets. I've talked about Jordan Mason on the mailbag episodes. I think that he at least has some question marks about his receiving just because of the situations he's been in. But I don't think that we're going to see Tank Bigsby be some legit pass catcher, week in and week out, even if there's injuries that occur to one of the other running backs. And so that's my fear with Bigsby from a ceiling perspective, which is why at his current ADP, I'm not really drafting him. Like, I was getting him when the market was slow to react to what the camp news was saying, and then his ADP obviously started to rise. And then then we started to see. I tried to do that before his ADP was rising, and then all the while, like Bashal Tutin's ADP was falling, and I'm trying to buy into that as well. So I've basically been trying to like get Jags running backs in most of my drafts that I do. And so I'm above the market on Tutin as well. He's still my favorite, like, late season hammer, Bashal Tutin. He showed up a little bit in that preseason game. Now, granted, it was later in the game, and it's not the same dudes that he's going to be facing / playing with. But I still think that Tutin has the skill set to be like the guy who emerges out of this backfield to be really fantasy viable. And ETN's fine too. But with Tank Bigsby, he has 16 targets in 2 years in the league. He has a poor yards per route run rate, so I'm not expecting them to use him a lot more as a pass catcher. I'm mostly fading at this point, especially with how things went with Bashal Tutin. I would expect Bigsby's ADP to fall a little bit, but when guys rise the way they do, it's a lot harder for them to kind of go back down and fall, just because you're going to need a lot of drafts. Like when just think of this mathematically, when a guy's like 180th overall, or in Bigsby's case, let's just say 160th overall, where he was going before, you could get just like a handful of people drafting him like 80th overall, and it'll rise a lot, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for him to fall because you can only go so far down. And he will only go so far down in these drafts to fall back down. So I'm anticipating myself not really drafting Tank Bigsby from here on out.
Let's talk about another guy who I think we both love, but I think we both agree is approaching very difficult to draft territory, and that is wide receiver Emeka Egbuka. When in doubt, draft a receiver from The Ohio State University. Everybody in camp is just saying that this guy is the dude. From Baker Mayfield to the other receivers on the team. You pair that with the Chris Godwin second ankle surgery that happened earlier in the summer, and you get an absolute explosion in ADP from the rookie, JJ.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at the late round prospect guide, he was an elite producer alongside Travis Hunter, alongside Tedero McMillan, and also Luther Burden ended up finding himself in the elite producer category as well as a second round pick, which does not happen very frequently. But I've talked about that many times on the show about how the model probably inflated Luther Burden a little bit, but I still like Luther Burden a lot too. But I love Emeka Egbuka. He was a really, really solid prospect. One of his comps was Chris Godwin in the prospect model. Robert Woods was another one. But my problem is that he's going to start approaching, or he's already inching towards that Jalen Waddle. Like, I was in a draft today, someone took him over Jalen Waddle. And I just can't necessarily do that. Calvin Ridley, I'm taking over Egbuka. After that, like, if you want to take Egbuka over, Jacoby Myers or Roma Dunze, I'm not going to totally fault you, but I do think that it's gotten to the point where a lot of this like upside is sort of priced in. So like, I'm at over 11% Egbuka, but a lot of that is from earlier in the offseason for the Millie. My average pick for him was 92nd overall, and now he's like an early 6th round pick. So it's like basically 30 spots in overall ADP for me and getting Egbuka. And it's unfortunate because if I let's say I have 15 drafts left in the Millie and I don't draft much Egbuka, then that 11 to 12% number is going to fall to like 9 to 10 to maybe low 10 percentage, like 10.5% or like 10%. And I want to be really overexposed to Egbuka. I really do, because I love him, right? Now, that's why I was drafting him so much. That's why he's a target in the late round draft guide. But it feels like he might end up just being more of the managed season-long home league type guy that you go after, because he's the kind of archetype that will go later in your home league and in season-long drafts in general. Like, he's someone that Bestball bros and gals and sisses, should I call them sisses? Is that bros and sisses? They will love this kind of player. And so they'll he climbs in ADP, and then the next person says, oh, I really want to, his ADP just continuously climbs, whereas we're likely not going to see that nearly as much in a managed league. So get your Egbuka exposure. I wouldn't get him much higher than where he's going now. I wouldn't get him at all high. Like, this is the max I think that you should be able to, you should be drafting him, but try to get as much as you possibly can, in your managed leagues and stuff where his price is going to be cheaper.
Very interested to see what happens with Bucky Irving as well. Speaking of Tampa Bay, off of the Rashad White injury this weekend. Obviously, the biggest bump is going to be with Sean Tucker, if there is going to be one, because Bucky Irving's already going at 22. So how high can you really go? But Bucks, an offense that I think a lot of people are interested in, and a lot of moving chess pieces because of the ambiguity of the Godwin injury and now the Rashad White injury. So it's going to be a very interesting month when it comes to assessing these Tampa Bay Buccaneers. For sure.
I feel good about, I sent a tweet last month that said that I was drafting a lot of Sean Tucker. I didn't know if it was me being a best ball bro or me being an absolute idiot. And it's at least, my 20th round Sean Tucker turning into a 19th round Sean Tucker. Let's go, baby. Let's go. You get a round of equity there. All right, let's move on to the guest. Tod Burros is the guest, also known as Todd from PA on Twitter. You guys have seen him in the Twitter streets and in a lot of best ball drafts. He's been a best ball analyst for a very, very long time. We talked about how he's fixing last year's mistakes that he made. That's a great conversation. Week 17 stacking, the importance of bye weeks, so much more. So without further ado, here is my interview with Todd. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's 2 chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. 1 per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get 1 bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. All right, Todd. Last year was kind of a difficult best ball season for some analysts. Teams seem to have been built for maximizing the playoff weeks, and it might have come at the expense of advance rates a little bit. And so I want to ask you, because you've been really transparent about your success and your failures and just kind of going through and talking through it with folks. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that happened last year? And what are some of the things that you're doing this year to sort of help balance advance rates and optimal playoff roster construction?
Yeah. So basically, one of the really fun things about best ball is that every year people overreact to the information from the year before. And then you start unwrapping the present, as it were, week one, right? And last year, I did something I had never done before, which was I gave up a good bit of. I decided to not worry as much about advance rate, trying to get that lucky team.
Yeah.
And it was based on the fact that I had had good success every other year, but my teams just would get eliminated week 15, week 16. So I went too far the other way. And I overstimulated my teams. I went heavy zero running back. Now, does that make heavy zero running back a bad strategy? I don't think it does.
Mm-hmm.
But I just happened to do it in the year every running back stayed healthy.
Right.
And the two older running backs that I faded, I did a lot of hero running back teams with Bijan and Breece Hall. I really felt like those guys had the chance to end up doing what Barkley and Henry did.
Right.
And I kind of just faded the older running backs or the guys who came off injury. And that really dinged my advance rate, a combination of the fact that in general, running backs didn't get hurt like they normally do.
Right.
And that the running backs that I faded also turned out to be the best plays on the board. So that really hurt my advance rate. I still got, a team into the FFPC final. Of course, it made it there with 0 quarterbacks healthy for the last week, but it wouldn't have mattered. My team, it didn't have a great last week. I got a few teams into the finals on Underdog. I didn't play much on DraftKings last year. But I ended up losing $7,000. So that was not fun.
Yeah.
So that is when you kind of reevaluate. Every year you have to evaluate your process. You have to judge it versus your own heart. Mm-hmm. And you need to also judge it versus how everyone else is interpreting what happened last year.
Right.
So for me, I've come up with this new strategy that I've been pretty excited about.
What can you speak on that strategy a little bit and how I'm assuming that it's because last year I had some struggle, like my playoff success rate was better than the norm, right? I didn't win it. I didn't take any down. I'm just saying that when my teams got in the playoffs, like of the teams that got there, for instance, my advance rate to get in was lower, but then my teams advanced at just as good, if not higher of a rate, versus the other teams that had gotten in, right?
Absolutely.
But I think that comes down to what you're saying is the roster construction and like the 0 RB type builds. I went pretty heavy 0 RB last year, and so, but I too felt the same way where it wasn't a successful season, which is why I'm doing season 2 of becoming a best ball bro. And it was one where now this year I'm looking and I'm saying, okay, where can I switch things up and how can I not be so monotonous with the way that I'm drafting? So how are you switching things up to make sure that that doesn't happen again?
Well, there's a couple things that I think we have to realize. And the main one is that these games have become like DFS, right? When we used to play MFL 10s, you could grind them and you could just eke out a profit just by being good, right? They were regular season contests. There are still regular season contests out there. Drafters does it. Underdog has some that are, season-long contests. But I like the new version of Bestball. But one thing you have to realize is it's set up for most people to lose every year, right? Because it's so dependent on getting to week 17 and then having a good lineup. So I was on with Mark Garcia. We did this thing at Hilo FF on Twitter. Very smart guy, works for 1 week season. And, he said, look, from a game theory perspective, my deep study of it, the two things that are most important to your EV are week 17 and advance rate.
Right.
Okay. And that kind of got me going. You know how it is when you get information when you do a podcast and then you kind of mull it, right?
Yeah, right.
And it informs your thoughts on how you want to adapt your own strategy.
Sure.
And it kind of tied into what I was already thinking, which was I was too aggressive last year. Yes, while any strategy can work, and there's nothing wrong with being a heavy zero running back, there's a very good chance that strategy could hurt your advance rates. And ultimately, that might not matter because what we play, and this is my main epiphany, this is a 3-part game.
Right.
And most analysts only talk about one part of that game. So we'll get to my overall strategy because it's a 3-part strategy, right? That takes into the fact that advance rate is important while not being everything. It's not something, it's funny in the Spike Week Discord, we always laugh about, the guys week 1, I got a 40% advance rate. Okay, that's great. But really, we want to build teams that have a chance we want to get to week 17 and have the ability to be a little bit different. Yep. Some people want to be very different. I'm not in that boat. But basically, the main thing, my strategy that's different is I'm putting a lot more thought into make sure that I'm not bleeding advance rate while I'm waiting for chaos to happen. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that we talk about in the Spike Week Discord a lot, chaos, right? Injuries is chaos. Right. People that we didn't expect getting opportunities, that's chaos.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to be prepared for chaos, especially with backup running backs and rookies who have a chance to come on late in the season. But that's kind of become pot stakes along with week 17 stuff, right? That's become, for smart people, that's become pot stakes. They're still not done as much as it probably should be, and you can overdo it. But what I'm doing is I'm building so that, like at running back, like last year, I would maybe take a hero running back build and I'd take one in the first or the second, and I wouldn't take one again till like the 12th round.
Right.
I'm more making sure that I've got 2 or 3 guys in each running back room who can get me points. Again, chaos can happen. One team might not work. But based on what we know now, and that's all we can base it on, I don't want to be bleeding points in my running back room while still adding enough good backup running backs who, the Isaac Guerrero types, the Jalen Wright types, the Will Shipley types,
right?
That if you get that injury to the key guy ahead of you, now you've supercharged your team. But I don't want to be 200 points behind week 5 because even if you get chaos, then it might not be enough.
Has this trickled into player exposure for you as well? Are you now, because it seems like you're trying to play it smarter, of course, but you're trying to not get as high variance with your lineups, let's say, right? Like where
it's more about like a mixed drink.
Right.
I want enough alcohol in each drink that I can get a buzz.
Right.
But I don't want to have so much alcohol that after 3 drinks I'm ready to go home and it's 8:30.
Yeah, right.
So it's about blending my teams. But to answer your question, I am a firm believer in not going nuts with exposure. I honestly think most people who do that are rookies who've never lost a lot of money.
Yeah, right.
Everyone. It's easy to be brave on Twitter with your 40-50% ownership on 9 guys. And if you hit it, and you might, right? You might. Right. But there is nothing worse than having a week 1 injury to a first round guy, and you have 30% of that guy. You are so far, one thing people don't realize is that success in advancing, the best advance rates every year are on early round picks. It is the most volatile. If, like the year Christian McCaffrey got hurt, the Tyreek was going right next to him. Well, that supercharged Tyreek's,
right.
Because you just killed that team next to you. That it's like a seesaw. If you get that early injury to, so I tend to stay right around 15% max on guys in the first 2 rounds, 25% through round like 10, 12. And then I'm willing to be, if there's somebody I really like late, I'm willing to go 30, 35%.
Oh, that's good to hear, because that's usually the way that I've approached things too, is that it's really hard for me, especially in this year's landscape where literally like the smallest things can make you say, all right, well, I'm not going to get Puka Nacua at 108 right now because the Matthew Stafford thing that's going on, or maybe I'll back off Malik Neighbors a little bit because of this foot, whatever the case may be, just because there's so many good players that are getting drafted in the first round.
It's the best first round I've ever seen.
Ever, right. And so like, to me, there's just no reason to be massively overweight on these players when the opportunity cost is so significant because the other guys around them are just so good. So it makes sense.
It's about how and who you're building with and mixing your combinations with those early guys while still taking a stand.
Right.
To me, 15% on a first round pick,
right.
2x. Right. And that means I'm going to have some guys at 3-4%.
Right.
I mean, to me, on an early pick, that is aggressive.
Right. Exactly.
But to other people, it's not. And to each his own. But I always like to say everyone's a hero until it's the year that you get the injuries to your 40%. And then all of a sudden, I can't tell you how many guys who argued with me on Twitter over the years who later say, this year I'm really cutting back my exposures. And I'm like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you mentioned the importance of week 17, we're talking to Mark about this and talking about how, there's these like sections of the season. How important, like when you talk about week 17, is it a situation where you're aggressively going after players who you think are in good week 17 matchups? And then on top of that, and when I talk about like optimizing for week 17, or is it the positions that you're taking, the type of positions, right? Because you're taking backup running backs and the attrition of the season and making sure that they're healthy. And then the last thing I want to ask to bring this all together is, do you think the community in general is overemphasizing, underemphasizing, or correctly emphasizing week 17 game stacking? That's something that I think a lot of listeners of this show who are maybe not full-blown best ball bros, but are getting into it and such, they still don't quite understand how heavily they should be making these week 17 game stacks. So talk about week 17 and how you kind of approach and think about that week.
Sure. It's a loaded question because I want to get into the 3-part thing, but I'll answer it according to the way you asked it for now.
Okay.
So basically, I went a little overboard last year, right? Because I was adapting to the fact that I wasn't having playoff success. And I think I Wile E. Coyote'd it a little too much. You know how Wiley's running on the road, and then all of a sudden there's no road, right? And he's going to fall and break his neck at the bottom of the canyon. That's how I was with week 17 last year. But if you go back a couple years where if you had Rashad Penny in round 13 and Amon-Ra St. Brown, that mini game stack, you couldn't live without that week 17.
Yeah.
So I'm what the difference in my approach this year is I'm far less likely to chase it than I was last year.
Yeah.
I'm less likely to take a player I think isn't the best player to make, but it's a great tiebreaker.
Yeah,
and that's how I look at it. And I think you do especially want to try and have a bring back for your quarterbacks in week 17. If you make 500 teams, am I going to have 50 that, but if I can manage it, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But it's not an overriding thing that, you want to end up over the canyon with no ground under your feet.
Right. Yep. Makes sense. And then do you think that the, like the types of players, going back to your sort of 3-step process, do you think the type of players that you're drafting, like, are you aiming for a specific archetype of running back? And is running, like we've talked about running back a lot here, is running back the position that you think really differentiates one team to the next when looking at regular season and regular season advance rate versus the playoff weeks, because we know running backs step in, they get a big workload, and they can be backups that do that, whereas it's a little bit more difficult at wide receiver. Is that the logic behind why you sort of emphasize the running back position a little bit more when sort of...
I really don't. It's just that what we ended up talking about, what I used as an example.
Yeah.
Each position group needs a certain amount of weight.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be so weak at any position group that I'm bleeding points all year. Yep. Okay. Some people are willing to go onesies and at the onesie positions, and that's not me.
Yeah.
I want again. All right. So here's where we'll go into the 3-part. You need to advance. You need to have a strategy for week 17, but you got to get there.
Right.
Right. There's week 15 and week 16. So what I have spent a lot of time this year on is something I'm calling tricking the pods. Okay. Yeah. And the first thing you have to understand is that there is a tremendous amount of luck in getting to week 17, but you want to put yourself in position. So I want to advance a good number of teams this year. My week 15, 16 strategy is not about how to get through those weeks, but to make it that the teams that get through there are unique for week 17. So how, and what do I mean by tricking the pods in week 15 and 16? I'll give you a couple examples. If the backup running back, let's say I have a Jalen Hurts stack and I take Will Shipley on that team. Yeah. I target the backup running back with the starting quarterback, right? Now, some people might think, well, why would you do that? You know, they're not really going to go off at the same time. Exactly. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe they could. Like Will Shipley, if Barkley gets hurt, he could give you 10, 12 points on a week when Jalen Hurts throws for 5 touchdowns and he's the guy you need. But the way I've tricked the pod is the following week, the one that didn't go off nuts the week before is going to be very low owned.
Right.
So I've tricked the pod. Now I have let's in that example, there might be in week 16, Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown go absolutely nuclear. Well, I want maybe Dallas Goedert on that team.
Yeah.
And I want Will Shipley on that team because now I don't need Jalen Hurts. I've got another quarterback. He might be 40% owned in week 17 because he just had that week that you had to have in week 16. But Will Shipley might only be 2% owned, 3% owned. Mm-hmm. Another way that you could trick the pods is something I've talked about for years. It's called stack cuffing. It's putting 2 running backs from the same team on the same lineup. Now, will I handcuff my stud early running back with his backup? No, that's not stack cuffing. Stack cuffing is the perfect stack cuff this year for me is Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears because both of them have ADPs that are later and both of them should be able to pay off their ADP. And you don't know which week it's going to be a Pollard week, a Spears week. But one thing you do know, if one of them goes down, the other one's going to get an 80% workload and have the value of about 80%. But in tricking, that's just stack cuffing. But the way that tricks the pod is what happens if Pollard goes absolutely nuclear week 16? He's the guy you got to have. And on the last play, he pulls a hammy.
Right.
Well, there's going to be almost no Tajay Spear teams in the finals. So my strategy is to make great teams that advance, realize that I need luck in week 15 and 16, but try and make it so that my teams that get to week 17 not only have correlation, but they have kind of like a secret ingredient.
Yeah. This is super interesting because I think that the way a lot of us think about stacking, team stacking, is Obviously, you get the weekly upside, right? If a quarterback throws a touchdown to the wide receiver, the tight end, then you're getting double the points. But then you're getting the season-long upside of if that's the offense that does well this year and outpaces ADP, then the whole entire offense will outpace ADP. If Drake May goes nuts this year, chances are all New England players will also, beat ADP expectation. But I love what you're talking about here, because I get questions frequently from people of how many players should I be stacking and how many wide receivers, yada, yada, yada. And obviously that's going to be a draft by draft kind of thing. And the quarterback
I can answer that if you want.
Yeah. So I would love to, because I think what you're saying here, what's so important is the idea that having that extra player, that extra stacking partner is so key in these important weeks for when that one player goes off the next week. If people didn't do that, the AJ Brown, Dallas Goedert example, if they didn't get Goddard, then they're relying on the AJ Brown stack and relationship with Jalen Hurts and connection to go off that next week. But you have Dallas Goedert, so you know that you have that differentiator. So I'll ask you, how many stacking partners do you usually go with your typical quarterback?
Well, it's like any other discussion. It's not only about numbers. It's about how you do it. Right? It's about how you paint that painting. So historically, if you take Jamar Chase and T. Higgins with Joe Burrow, in general, that doesn't work out that well for that team, right? Because you've put so much value and they tend not to go off at the same time. So the first and second option I'll rarely have on the same team. I'll do it some. If I'm going to build 50 Joe Burrow teams, I'm going to have 2 or 3, 4 or 5 ones with T. Higgins. Yeah, right. But in general, I'm more thinking of, for that AJ Brown thing. There's 2 different things. One, you get to week 17, and again, you got to think about what is going to get most people to week 17, especially on Underdog, where, Bestball Mania, it's 18 or 16 teams in a pod. If that, maybe there's a week where there isn't a guy, but oftentimes there's that one guy who drags a ton of teams to the next week. So now you're in week 17, and let's say AJ Brown and Hurts again just go absolutely nuclear, right? Well, there's going to be a ton of you haven't really separated enough from the field.
Right.
Because it might be a 20%, Hurts might be 40% owned in the final. AJ Brown might be 30%, but Hurts, AJ Brown, and Goddard might only be 5% owned. Right. And maybe it's AJ Brown the following week who just has an okay week and Goddard goes nuclear. But if you've ever played DFS and you have a team that's, you're going down the stretch and you're trying to take something down, having that extra piece in that game, there's a comfort level to it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, again, I won't, take Dallas Goedert around early just to make that happen. But if he's standing there at ADP and I can add him as another piece, I will. And then the other way you can do it is, like I said, the Will Shipley example. Find that rookie or that backup running back. Yeah. If you're doing Patrick Mahomes, taking a Brashard Smith or a Jalen Royals at the end, taking that one extra dart throw so that you've got that one more answer for that stack than most of your competition. That's the way I'm thinking of it. I'm not saying it's 100% right. It might not be. Because every year we unwrap the present and it's a different answer.
Yeah, but I love thinking about it this way because, our late round picks are not going to be giving us many usable weeks to begin with. Right, like we know that inherently, just based on hit rates from late round guys. Obviously, we want them to hit. Right, I'm just saying generally speaking. But where I think the leverage that you're speaking of here can really come into play is that if those usable weeks that they do, let's say that they give you 3 of them or 4 of them or something like that. if it hits at the right time, that's your way of differentiating, right? So you might be sitting on Jalen Royals, right? And we're hoping that Jalen Royals can give us production to start, the front half of the season with Rashee Rice sidelined. But you're also sitting with Jalen Royals hoping for that week to hit later in the season when maybe you don't have the same type of advance rate for that individual player that, is being drafted late. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And the other thing that my real big focus where I think I made a mistake, I'm pretty good at watching tape, right? But I think I invested too much in who I liked and not enough in who had an opportunity. So last year, I really didn't like Bucky Irving that much. Pro scouts get him wrong. I'm going to get him wrong.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I overlooked was the fact that Rachaad White was a known quantity. He wasn't a good running back.
Right.
Right. So that was a bit, I did get some Bucky at the end, and a lot of the teams that made it to the finals for me were Bucky Irving teams.
Yeah.
I'm spending a lot more time this year making sure that my player takes aren't driving me off the cliff.
Yeah.
And that I'm overlooking opportunity.
Right.
And I also like to combine floor and ceiling. So, if I have I drafted a team recently with, A.J. Brown, Jameson Williams, just a bunch of real guys that we think of as spiky.
Yeah.
Right. So at the end, instead of taking a Royals, one of those guys that I'm, a Thornton.
Yeah.
I took my last round pick was Jalen Coker. Not an exciting guy, but that guy who I think balanced that wide receiver room on that team that hopefully could get me to the playoffs.
Yeah.
And he's still got enough talent that maybe he ends up being the answer too.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just less, you don't think of it that way.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I'll mix and add, on teams where I have a lot of high, guys who, tend to average 15 to 20 yards a catch. I'm more likely to add an Adam Thielen to a team like that than I am a team where I've got, 2 or 3 Zay Flowers types.
Yeah.
Right. In that case, I'm trying to add a little nitroglycerin to the back end of that wide receiver room.
Yeah. I've done the same thing even with, because, DraftKings, you get 20 rounds, you're going to get even deeper players in round 20. And if I have like a Kansas City Denver thing going, I look at the 20th round wideouts for Denver, and you're looking at Devon Vele and Troy Franklin, right? Where Vele is very much likely to play their slot role, higher floor, more than likely. Franklin's going to be the volatile, up and down. So I've based that decision usually off of, do I need the floor? Do I need the ceiling? Right. And so
I've got probably 12% Franklin and 3% Vele.
Right.
But
it's also
I also really
PPR,
like Troy Franklin coming out.
Yeah, no. I don't have a problem with anyone going one way or the other with that.
But your overall point, I think, is 100% correct.
Yeah.
I don't want to, let my player take away from the point you were trying to make, which I think is and again, you don't want to wear 4 condoms when you're drafting.
Sure.
Right? There is some truth to the guys on the internet who love to talk about how aggressive they are. There is some truth to that, right? You don't want to play too conservatively, but you also don't want to have a team that's just all guys who are boom or bust. Yeah. That's just the way I play. Yeah. And, I'm comfortable with my decision.
It's a season long, same thing in season long, right? Where when you're managing a league, you have to also think about the predictability of these players, right? Whenever you're going into a given week and how comfortable you're going to be starting them based on, and that predictability comes in many forms. It's not just how they score points, but it's also, what's the overall talent profile of this player. Like Travis Hunter, the example I use in my guide this year was Travis Hunter versus Cortland Sutton. Like, we know what Cortland Sutton is. We have a comfortability with Cortland Sutton. Travis Hunter has a more volatile profile, but we don't know what that upside and ambiguity looks like, right? So there could be more, there could be less, but it's about weighing all of those things and understanding those things as opposed to just looking at that one projected number that folks like to draft off of. That's obviously more of a season long thing in the way that people approach season long, is that they're just looking at that one projected number as opposed to how we're getting to that number. How are we actually accumulating, how's this player accumulating the statistics that he's accumulating? It goes a long way to have that balanced approach.
I look at season long very differently, where I am willing to just YOLO it in the later rounds,
100%,
because I can make up for it with waivers.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. I'm much less likely to want to take a 0 in best ball than I am in season long with my draft picks.
Yeah.
That being said, again, it's not whether you take. I mean, I have way more Hunter than I do Sutton in that example.
Yeah.
But
same.
I like Ridley in that range, like
Sure.
somebody else might like Sutton.
Sure.
And, if I have 3 wide receivers in the first 4 rounds and Hunter's sitting there in the 5th, man, that is an amazing
Exactly.
thing.
Easy click.
But if we so again, it's all about thinking about your team as you're building it, and the kind of team that you're building, and making sure that you're going to put enough nitroglycerin in it, that you have that kind of upside that can take you to the top of a 700,000 man tournament, while realizing you're not playing against 700,000 people. You're playing against 12, followed by 16, followed by 16, followed by 700.
Yep. One question that I got, so I was at the Fantasy Football Expo this past weekend, and someone came up to me and they were like, man, love the Becoming a Bestball Bro series. The one question that I want you to ask somebody is how they handle bye weeks. And I realized that this offseason, I haven't really talked about bye weeks at all. And so I'm curious, how important are bye weeks to you in terms of being overexposed to certain weeks? And, obviously the onesie positions where you don't have as many of them that you're drafting, making sure there's no overlap. Are you always making sure, are you okay with taking a 0 during a bye week at tight end or something, let's say, or, which direction do you really go in?
Well, I wrote an article about 10 years ago about MFL 10s, and one of the things I stressed was bye weeks, right? Not wanting to take a 0. But that was a game where one team basically got all the money, right? Second place was $10, right? First place was $90, right? Or $100. It was a big difference. I've come full circle. I don't even look at buys. So here's why. The biggest example is quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And let's say I'm giving up 20 points because I've got 2 quarterbacks, and I only build a lot of 2 quarterback teams this year. I'm actually doing your old strategy. Yeah. 2 guys within that window, right? Your old strategy. Late round QB. It's not quite late round QB like it used to be, but the key part of your strategy that I understood back in the day was getting 2 within the window. Yeah. Right. That 8 to 15 range. If you get 2 of those, you're good. Yeah. That's kind of how I'm building most of my teams this year. So let's say I get a 0. Well, I'm going to get some of that back, most likely. How am I going to get some of that back? I'm going to get some of that back because now I have 2 shots, 2 other weeks at a higher score, right? So I'm going to guess that I get half of that back. So I've bled 10 points. If I bled 10 points, I now advance 2 teams, right? Not just 1, but 2 teams advance, and it doesn't matter if you're first or second. Right, you get just you move forward just as much. So if you look at it, a lot of times, second and third place are very close, and first place isn't. Right, like they'll be 150 points ahead. Sure. Doesn't matter. So I'm less concerned. I've made up about half of those points. And if I advance, now I have a combination of 2 quarterbacks because most people don't feel comfortable with those 2 buys. Yeah. I have a unique combination to get through the luck weeks.
Yep.
And I have a unique combination for the last week if I get there. And not to mention the fact that I took those two guys because they were the best guys for my team.
That was the optimal pick.
That was the optimal guy. I took Michael Penix as my second quarterback because I had Atlanta with, I had Mooney with Kyron Williams, right? It wasn't the best, but it was the best second stack I could make at that time. I'm not going to worry about 10 points in that situation. I'm just not. With two teams advancing, the chance of me missing out because I did a bye week, I'm willing to forego for the chance of being unique. Going forward.
I would imagine too that it's even more so at tight end where they just don't score as many points, right? Like realistically, if you miss out on a tight end, even on DraftKings where it's full PPR, you might only be missing out on, and there's going to be a lot of 3 tight end builds, but you still might be missing out on like 6 points that week, like realistically. So it's really
if that's what kills me.
Yeah, right.
That's what kills that team.
Yeah, but again, you're making the point about differentiation, which is something that has been very consistent in all of these conversations, and it's so unbelievably important that you're getting those unique combos because the market is going to be, especially like
without going crazy to get them and taking someone 2 rounds. You have people, and I'm not saying you never pull up players. If there's a flat zone in ADP, like I've been pulling George Pickens up lately. I've been pulling Jameson Williams up into that, end of the third round, beginning of the fourth. It's very flat there.
Yeah, it's a dead spot. It's a dead spot.
I will pull people up, but I'm not going to pull people up over people I like more when I still might get them if I wait, just so I can say that I'm being different.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. Okay, I have 2 more questions I want to ask you. So right now it's the preseason. Coach speak is in full force. We get beat writers saying different things every single day. Are you someone that dramatically changes your player stances based on preseason reps and what the media is saying about a player, or do you not care? Like, how do you dissect coach speak?
Well, like anything else, it's an individual basis, right? We have to put our thinking caps on, and you have to compare it to how enthusiastic the crowd is about it. Because every year there's that 1 or 2 guys who get steamed up, Wile E. Coyote over the canyon, and you got to know when to just say, all right, I'm going to let this one go.
Right.
And it's staying on top of your emotions. Like, I didn't like that Washington backup that much, Jacory something.
Yeah, Croskey-Merritt, right.
But I really like the Redskin Commander backfield. Historically, the air raid can have some really big weeks for running backs. If you remember what Kenyon Drake did in Arizona, those couple weeks. So he's gone up, but he's only in the 15th round. So am I really giving up much that I didn't take him in the 20th and I'm getting him now in the 15th?
Right.
No.
Right.
But if he starts going in the 12th or the 11th, I'll just say, okay, I missed it.
Yeah.
I missed it. So I'm willing to, I'm paying, I'm pretty heavy drafting Sampson right now for Cleveland.
Same. Yeah, same.
He's moved up, but I think there's still enough juice there where I'm getting a floor ceiling combo that's great.
Yeah.
That I'll just worry that other people got a better deal. But again, a couple more rounds and I'll look for someone else. I'll just say, I really, really try and avoid being Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. All right. Last question for you. Who are some of your go-to stacks this year?
Well, my highest owned quarterback is Justin Fields, and I really don't care whether I stack him.
Yeah, right.
Drake May is one of my favorites. I really don't, I take him with Hunter Henry a lot. That's a nice, safe back stack.
Yep.
I'll take him some with Diggs. Let me look up some of my, I really like Michael Penix with Drake London.
Yeah,
I think that's just so cheap. I think that is just that's one that could feed families possibly.
Yeah.
Let me get to my ownership real quick. Dak with Pickens, Dak with Lamb.
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence with Hunter and Brian Thomas.
Yeah.
Again, what do all these have in common? They're later quarterbacks.
Yeah.
With, and one of the sneaky ones that I've been building in, especially on 20 rounds, is Malik Neighbors with either Russ or some people will take Dart, some people will take Russ. Could be either, right? Yeah. In a 20-round tournament, having Russ, even if he plays only the first 8 games, that could be the difference between advancing. And then what if Dart comes in and he gets hurt? And now week 17, Russ is at quarterback again. So I do take Dart in 18 rounds sometimes. If I take Russ in an 18 round, it's in a 2-quarterback build. I'm basically saying in this team, Russ, the Giants are good. Russ is good. Yeah. And they're in the playoffs and he plays the whole season. Right, so again, you have to think through what scenario do you need for this lineup to be good? And if you're building 5 teams out of 500, you might say, a lot of guys will say, I hate Russ. Russ is done. I built 5 teams out of 500 with my first round pick, the guy who could break fantasy. Right. And you're telling me you want 0 Russ. Right. So that's a little bit overkill and the kind of thing I try and avoid, JJ.
I love it. Tod, this was great. People are definitely going to get something from this conversation and the knowledge you just dropped. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're doing in the fantasy space, all that good stuff.
I still do my Run to Daylight podcast. I'm not as active as I used to be. I'll be doing about 4 or 5 more of those. I'm at Bestball NFL on Twitter, and I've been doing this a while. And I'm if someone asks a question, I answer a question, and I'm really glad you invited me on.
Yeah, man, this was great. When did you officially move away from the Tod from PA?
It's still my name.
Right.
But it's not my handle. About 2 years ago.
Yeah, I remember you switching it. I just couldn't remember when it was.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I did that was because I used to call into Ross Tucker on Sirius, and I was Tod from PA. So when I joined Twitter, I'm like, all right, maybe someone will know me.
Right. Yeah, I love it. As usual, you guys can check out my stuff over on lateround.com. Draft guides available for sale. Make sure you're subscribed to this podcast and the YouTube channel. YouTube channel is at youtube.com/@lateroundff. Otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.